linguistic, mathematical, ethical, logistic, and religious problems, but there are no genuine philosophical problems.
You're trivializing philosophy.
Philosophy is just a byproduct of misunderstanding language. Why don't you realize that?
Yeah. Yeah, just okay.
So, that's actually quite an interesting movie because it does his whole life. And Bertrand Russell a little bit. This is I suppose, is that the one I was just on? Yes. Sorry, I don't want to do that again. Here's an impression of him as a young man.
Es gab keine Konkurrenz zwischen dem Kino und dem Seminar. Ich liebte Film.
Oops, it's in German, isn't it?
Wir haben beide dieselbe Einstellung, dass der Mensch
We have the
verstehen
same
muss
idea.
oder sterben. Er ist der junge Mann, auf den man immer hofft. Er wirkt auf mich, genau wie ich auf dich wirke.
So, actually, the movie's in English, so that was dubbed for a German audience. So, Wittgenstein is a genius, but also hard to get along with. One of those kinds of folks. Studying engineering, his father is the richest man in Europe and owns like all the munitions and steel production. And World War I happens. And by the way, after World War I is over, the family's even richer than before because they sold products to not only the ones fighting in Europe, but even others, right? So they made money from both sides. But Wittgenstein never really was interested in money. He was interested in engineering. He ended up trying to learn how to create flight, how to make flight. So he went to England to study ballooning, and as he was there, he also got interested in making plane engines, and he invented the jet engine. The only trouble was they were still using planes made out of toothpicks, basically, and so you couldn't mount the jet engine on any of the aircraft they had because it couldn't handle it. So it was a little bit before its time. Pretty interesting. But while he was there studying flight, he also was reading an article about language, and he decided to go to Professor Russell, and he handed him a paper that he had written, and he said to Professor Russell, this is just a young German student, comes up and says, "Read this, and if it's any good, I'll be a philosopher. If it isn't, I'll be a pilot." And Russell took it and read it, and the next time they met, he said, "Don't be a pilot." And Wittgenstein assumed that meant that it was good enough that he should be a philosopher. I think actually Russell was scared to death of this guy being a pilot. So that was... Yeah, but in any case, he decided to become a philosopher. Well, in World War I, he ended up fighting for the Austrians because he was Austrian, and he was captured by the Italians, and so he spent a long time in an Italian prisoner of war camp. And while he was there, he wrote a book that he came back and had Russell publish, and it was called the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. And it's online in different ways. Project Gutenberg. There's other ones. You could actually buy it. I don't know why you would, because it's on the web. Let's just go to this, and it'll explain what it is. Now the thing, George Moore, by the way, was the other guy sitting in that classroom with Bertrand Russell listening to Wittgenstein in the movie. But so Russell took the Tractatus, which only had 7 sentences in it, numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And those sentences were these propositions. These are the 7 sentences. Here's proposition 1: the world is all that is the case. And then the decimal points underneath it were explanatory sentences. And if it was like 1.1, the world is the totality of facts, not of things, so it's referring to point 1. But 1.11 is explaining 1.1. Right, so, and 1.2 is also explaining 1.1. So that's how the book is structured. But there's only actually 7 propositions. The first, the world is all that is the case. What is the case, this is number 2, a fact, is the existence of states of affairs, and the possibility, etc., etc. And what comes out of this, by the way, is what eventually becomes a logical language, which eventually develops into computer code. So that's this is the beginnings really of he and Bertrand Russell was creating a logical language, with the idea being, and this goes really back to Leibniz, that the main reason we have wars and disagreements among different countries and peoples and so on is because we don't understand one another. So what we need is a more perfect language, that once you have it, a very mathematically based kind of language, that you don't make mistakes. So we understand one another very precisely, right? That's kind of their goal. And Bertrand Russell's main work, by the way, which we do have a 3-volume copy of here at the library, if you want to go and look at it. It's sitting on the shelf, but please be nice to it. You can actually check it out, I guess. But last time I looked, and that was about 20 years ago, it was worth like $800. So please be nice to it, right? But it's called Principia Mathematica. And remember, the Principia in the first case is usually referred to as Sir Isaac Newton's book, the Principia. But the Principia Mathematica is written by Alfred North Whitehead and Bertrand Russell. And it's essentially the development of a logical language. Here's an example of some of it there. Pardon? Yes.
It's set theory language.
It's
saying something is related to something, or saying something is in something, except in a really very complicated shorthand, so that you don't have to write 3 paragraphs to say that 1 equals 2.
And you can see that the invention, by the way, of truth tables is part of the Tractatus. So Wittgenstein invents truth tables. Are you familiar with those? So if we have a statement P, it's true or false, right? Because it's an either A, E, I, or O statement type. But if we have P, it's true or false. That's easy to know that it's either true or false. There's only 2 possibilities. But if I have a statement P and Q, now both P and Q could be true or false. So I end up with a truth table of 4 possibilities. Both statements could be true. P could be true and Q false. Q could be true and P false, or both P and Q could be false. So truth tables, it's actually the way computers figure out whether a particular line of code is to be acted on or not, yes or no, right? So that's basically what a truth table does. So Wittgenstein basically came to the conclusion that all these problems that you have in metaphysics and everything else could all be solved by just fixing language so that you've got it very clear and precise and you don't have any problem. And we're done. So as far as he was concerned, philosophy is done with. I'm going off now and do something practical. And so he decided to go and become a teacher of an elementary school in Austria, rural Austria. But in order to become a teacher, first he had to go to a school. And the school was a school that taught you how to be a teacher using the method of John Dewey. Okay? Now you see how these things, the world, all of a sudden interacts, right? And so here you have basically a Kantian thinking language absolutes. We can just solve this. And all of a sudden he spends summer walking around with John Dewey books, and he's just his head goes flat, and he realizes that his Tractatus is all wrong. And so he creates one philosophical development with the Tractatus, but after this experience, and by the way, it was a terrible experience for Wittgenstein and for the kids. In fact, at one point, he apparently knocked one young girl out in class. It just pretty clearly means that if you're an autistic genius, you should not be teaching elementary school. And the farmers literally chased him out of town with pitchforks,
That's so funny.
running away.
It sounds like a comic. Yes.
And he ended up becoming an architect and so on. He built a house, and it's so weird. It's still there. Wittgenstein's house, the Wittgenstein house. I'm pretty sure this. Yep. So it's incredibly practical. He even made the doorknobs and hinges and things. Everything is measured and oh my goodness, it's just crazy. So he did that for a while. Then he was convinced he should go back. He was invited back by Russell to come back and teach again. And so when he came back, now he's writing a different book called Philosophical Investigations. And this is where he invents language games. And the idea that essentially the Tractatus is right, but there's not just one language. There's many different language games, all of which are set up in a particular context. Kind of like the lion. How would I know, what a lion's world is like unless I, what he's thinking, unless I'm in his world. And so there were two philosophies that were essentially a result of Wittgenstein's genius. One is traditionally considered analytic philosophy, and he wasn't the only one that did that. He was working with Gottlob Frege and Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead, a bunch of other folks. So that was all a current element of what was going on in philosophy. And Quine, by the way, who we'll talk about, is part of that. And that was a lot of what I got in undergraduate philosophy and graduate philosophy was language analysis. I had one course in philosophy of language where we sat and tried to define what the word good meant for the entire semester. Our job was to find all the different uses of the word good and add them all up and figure out what could good actually mean. So that was fun. Very weird kind of thing. Quiz question, right? Shoot, I don't remember what it is.
Can we make one up?
I already have one made up. I have to go find it. That's the trouble. So I have to sign in. Anybody remember my password?
Password?
There it is. And oh, I'm going to do this. So many things.
Have you got a password and a security key?
I know. Why? Oh, I didn't even put it in yet. Shoot. I'm late.
A very important date.